Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be taking this empty aquarium and turning it into an awesome, super chill planted tank that you can recreate at home. Fortunately, ran into some issues with this setup, but we were still able to make it work. You'll see later in the video. First off, here is the tank. It is roughly a 14-gallon cube aquarium. It's sitting on this random black stand that we had. And one thing that's really important is that it's located right next to an outlet. That's going to come in super handy. This aquarium comes with a leveling mat, and you can see we have some modifications on our stand just to make sure everything is level and ready to go. The light that we're going to be using today is one of my absolute favorite nano tank lights. It's the ONF Flat Nano LED, and it's super perfect for this because it's totally adjustable. We can swing it right to left, we can raise it up and down, and it's just going to be perfect for this aquarium. It's one of my all-time favorites. I'll put a link down in the description for this light and of course all of the other things that we use today. So the first thing that we want to do before setting up the tank is put down some towels because it's going to get a little messy, and this is right in my dining room. So I'm going to lay down a couple of towels. So as you can see, we had some unforeseen challenges with this setup. There was an ice storm, and so you can see me slipping around the backyard. My aquascaping materials that I had previously set out ended up getting frozen in the backyard. So we had to grab this stuff and put it under some hot water for a while to get it all thawed out. Also, another thing, the sand that I wanted to use was in this bucket and it was frozen solid. So we had to skip that. I'm gonna go ahead and check and see if we have some different aquascaping substrate for me. So we ended up using this stuff even though I didn't really want to, and I'll explain a little bit more of that in the future here. Since we're in Fish Food headquarters, just wanted to mention, guys, if you purchase legit fish food from now on, you're gonna get this cool new thank you card that I had made up. It has this little 2-inch, roughly 2.5-inch discus sticker. I thought was pretty cool. So if you make a purchase, you're gonna get one of those and probably some other extras. Thank you so much for your support. So for this build, we're gonna be using spider wood and suryu stone. So once we got everything thawed out, I went ahead and set things up on our little table so we could begin to start conceptualizing the aquascape. Before we do that, we need to add our substrate, of course, so I'm going to be pouring this in. I think this is fluval stratum, but don't quote me on it. It's been in a bucket for a super long time. As I spread this stuff out, I'm going to focus on putting more of it in the back of the aquarium. That's just kind of a standard technique. That way we can kind of create the illusion of depth, even though we're gonna mostly do that with the aquascaping materials that we put in here in a second. As you can see, there's a pretty significant slope to the rear, and we're actually gonna add even more substrate later on. So now this is the fun part. This is where we just kind of mess around with the few pieces of spider wood that we have, try and figure out a cohesive blend of the 3 pieces we have, and getting that cool look that we're trying to make here. I didn't go into this scape with any real intention of what I wanted to create. I of course know what plants I'm going to be using, but what I'm really trying to do is just take these 3 pieces of wood and make them look like they're all one piece. These pieces of spider wood are pretty big relative to the tank, so I know that there's going to be some poking out of the top, and that's going to play pretty well into the overall feel of the scape. You'll see what I mean by that in a little bit. Brand new spider wood that you get is not gonna look like this. This is stuff that has been in tanks previously. It's been outside for forever, and that's why it has this darker color. The wood is essentially seasoned, and it's also a little bit more pliable, so I can even kind of bend pieces with my hands to make them fit. Now we're going to be adding our rocks, and for this scape, I've already mentioned it, but we're going to be using some suryu stones. These are just some smaller pieces that I had in the backyard, and I think they're going to work perfectly. They're actually more than just for looks, though. They serve a functional purpose here, and we're going to see what I mean by that in just a second. Now, because the wood that we have is not waterlogged, it would just float up, and so we need to use some super glue to hold that wood onto the rocks that we put in. And so now what I'm gonna do after I've strategically placed a few of the rocks really tight up next to the wood is just super glue them to the rocks. If you just use super glue, you're gonna see it eventually, and so one way to protect against this is to take some of that active substrate, crumple it up in your fingers, and sprinkle it over the areas that you super glue. That's gonna help hide everything, and it's gonna look awesome. Once I was done with this, I wanted to add a little bit more substrate to the tank just to kind of fill in this back portion, because we might want to add some stems or even some other types of plants in the future. So after I spilled a bunch of it on the floor with this last porous substrate, we're pretty much ready to add water. But before we do that, I want to show off some of the plants that we're going to be using today. We're not working with a ton of stuff, and I'm going to go ahead and drop that really quick. Let's start by adding in some of this trident leaf Java fern. It's been in a super low light tank for a long time, and it's gotten really leggy and thin, but I actually really like the way that this plant looks. So we're going to take it and we're just going to nestle it in between some key spots in the wood. This is a perfect way to plant this plant, not down in the substrate. Because it has that rhizome, we don't want to cover it up with substrate, of course, so this is just a perfect way to do it. Just sort of giving the tank that jungle feel, having this fern-like plant placed all around the wood, I think is going to look really good. And unfortunately, this is pretty much the only other plant that I have to work with today. This is some old chain sword that I pulled out of one of the holding tanks. It does not look very good. I don't have a lot to work with, but I'm just gonna go ahead and sparse out some of the living tissue that's still there, get rid of some of the dead stuff, and probably plant some of this in the back of the tank. I know that seems maybe a little counterintuitive, but this stuff, I mean, if we put low enough light in the tank, it should grow up a little tall. I'm not really looking to have big stems that I have to be constantly trimming. I think this might be an okay way to do it. I don't want to put this in the foreground of the tank because it's just going to get crazy and it's going to ruin the overall look. Speaking of plants, even though we didn't get our specific plants for this build from Aquarium Co-op, I know Corey is running a sale on plants right now. If you end up getting 4 or more plants from him, you can save 15% off. And if you're looking to set up a tank or you just need some new plants, I definitely recommend checking out Aquarium Co-op if you need anything new. There'll be a link down in the description, of course. So now, because we don't have a ton of other plants to work with, we're going to go ahead and fill the tank. I just grab a paper towel, put it down on the bottom of the aquarium. That way, when I pour water in, it doesn't disrupt that substrate and kick up a big mess. Once the tank was getting closer to being done, I realized that this would be a perfect setup to include some pothos plants. So I grabbed a few of these small pots that I had, got rid of all the soil off of them, and cleaned the roots off as well as I could. This is an important step when you're going to do something like adding a houseplant. You don't want to be introducing a bunch of extra soil to the tank. It's not going to be a super bad thing if you do, but if you can avoid it, just avoid it. Here you can see those roots are pretty cleaned up and they're ready to add to the tank. I'm going to try and find a couple spots up here at the top. That way we can get some really good up out of the water growth, and hopefully that pothos will branch out and grow along this vine. Maybe we can incorporate it into the wall at some point. But after a little bit of a balancing act, we got a few pieces in some good positions, and I think eventually in a few weeks it's going to look pretty good. One thing that you're going to notice right when you set up your tank is that you're probably going to have a bunch of debris on the top of the water. This is a situation where a skimmer comes in really handy, but we're not going to be able to use a skimmer because we're going to be throwing in a bunch of the Sylvinia minima, and that's going to really help to keep the nutrient level down because we were forced to use this nutrient substrate despite the fact that we don't have a ton of plants planted in it. What we can do is put on a little filter though. So this is an Azu hang on back filter. This is the 60 version and it's like roughly 30 gallons per hour. It's my absolute favorite HOB. It'll also be linked down in the description. It is perfect for these smaller aquariums. And since we have this HOB, we're gonna throw in some of those extra cuttings of the pothos plant. We can just rest it in the top of the filter, and that'll be just another place that we can have the plant grow out of. Now at this point, we're gonna add in some of our Fritz nitrifying bacteria to get the cycle going and ensure that we can add fish whenever we do. We're not gonna be doing that today, but it doesn't hurt to add this stuff. It's gonna help get the cycle going and make sure that everything is ready to go when we do add fish, whenever that is. The last thing that we haven't included in this aquarium that would be probably important for you is some type of a heater, especially if you're gonna keep like a betta fish in here. I unfortunately don't have the right size heater for this tank at this moment, but just know that that is something, if you're gonna be setting up a tank like this at home, that you probably want to do unless you're keeping your house at 75 degrees all the time. So because of the weather and frankly the timing of this whole setup, we weren't really able to finish off the foreground of this aquarium, but in the future here I will be getting some tissue cultures or probably some dwarf hairgrass like you see in this tank, and I think adding that plant would really help to kind of bring this whole thing together. Here's the tank a few days later. You can see all the pothos is really perked up and looking healthy. I've been keeping the light at a lower setting not to burn those leaves. As you can see, everything is looking pretty happy. Some of the plants in the back, the dwarf chain swords, perking up and not looking dead like when I put them in the aquarium. But that foreground is just, it's killing me. We need to add some definition to this thing. And so I'm gonna be going to the fish store here pretty soon. We gotta rectify this situation. And we also need to get some fish to put in this thing. The Sylvinia is doing its its thing. It's just, I mean, it's a bulletproof plant. It's a huge nutrient sponge, and it's helping to keep this aquarium from getting out of control and introducing algae, but it's still not impossible. So we're crossing our fingers, we're doing our water changes, even though we don't even have fish in it. And with that, guys, I think that's gonna wrap up this super chill, easy planted aquarium setup, something that pretty much anybody can replicate if they're into it. I know we didn't really get this thing complete, but given the circumstances, I think we did a pretty good job. I know you guys know how it is. Sometimes you just can't do it, especially around the holidays, but I think it turned out pretty okay. If you have recommendations for fish to put in this, I'm kind of going between another betta or maybe an actual proper guppy colony, or maybe some endlers. I don't know. I want to go for some small fish. So if you have suggestions, if you think you know what would be the perfect fish for this tank, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.